Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. So we had a bunch of primaries last night, some interesting results, some good, some bad. So we're gonna be looking at all the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, it was an interesting night overall. We had some pretty big victories, but the interesting thing was all the things we consider big victories were all races that we kind of expected it to go that way anyways. The losses we had came out of nowhere, and were kind of the toss-ups. So it was a mixed night. So let's get into it by looking at the Illinois governor primary election. So pretty much as we expected for the Democrats, J.B. Pritzker, the incumbent Democrat, he's not like well liked, but he's not hated either. He's like he no one expected Beverly Miles or Mills to win. Um, and she only got 8% of the vote anyways. She actually was leading in a couple counties, and she did pretty well in like Western Illinois. But yeah, in the end, she did not win, and she didn't even come close. She got 8% of the vote. She overperformed how I thought she'd do. I thought she'd be lucky to get 5% of the vote, but no, she got 8%. So maybe there's a little bit of anti JB Pritzker rhetoric in like Western Illinois, like farm country, but really not a whole lot. Nothing really changed there. Go down to the Republican primary. Pretty much what we expected. Darren Bailey actually outperformed my expectations. I thought Darren Bailey would win, but not with 55% of the vote and winning the Chicago suburbs. This came out of nowhere. The Chicago suburbs are traditionally, like 10, 20 years ago, used to be relatively Republican leaning areas. Barack Obama came in, he won these areas, and since then they've pretty much been leaned likely Democrat, and they've been more Democratic leaning areas. But Darren Bailey actually did really well up here. Like he almost 50% of the vote in Cook County. In DuPage, he got 45%. In Will County, he got 57%. Like, dang, this Darren Bailey did way better than I expected in the Illinois suburbs, which is actually really good in my opinion because it tells us that these suburbs are possibly, excuse me, upset with the Democrats over crime and inflation, and we may see some suburban reversion back to the GOP based on how he did so well up here. It shows me the Republicans that do live in the suburbs are energized and they're ready to turn out, and they supported a very Trumpian candidate. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the primary or in the general election, I should say. Richard Irvin, who came in second place with 18% of the vote, he carried his home county of McLean by a pretty sizable margin. That is where Aurora is located, the city he is mayor of. Not a huge surprise there, and that's really where the bulk of his votes came from. He won Winnebago County very narrowly. He also won Vermilion County by about 10 points, and then St. Clair by about 10 points. So Irvin did pretty well in like the smaller metro areas, while Darren Bailey did very well in the big metro areas, the suburbs, and he pretty much swept the entire rural areas. Jesse Sullivan did decently in a couple of random counties here near where he lives. And then Paul Schmimpf won this really random county in Monroe County. I have to assume he's from there because I have no idea why he would win it otherwise. So really, Darren Bailey won. He's a solid candidate. He has a good shot at winning the election. It's going to be a long battle, going to be an uphill climb. But if anyone can win this race, I think it is Darren Bailey, based on his performance in the Chicago suburbs and how well he did down south. Like he got 70% of the vote, 90% of the vote in some of these southern counties. That tells me that he's liked by the southern part of the state, and he's also liked by the northern part of the state. So if a Republican wants to win in Illinois, they have to do very well in the rural, socially conservative areas, and they also have to do well in the moderate areas. And based on the primary results, which don't mean a whole lot, but they kind of give you a little bit of an estimate about how well they'll do, he's liked in both. So good start overall. I think he should have a good shot at victory. Richard Irvin came in second. Jesse Sullivan came in third. Not a whole lot to say there. We go over. Let's see. Yeah, 1%. Yeah, Paul Schmidt, this guy only got like 3% of the vote, but he won a county, so I have to assume he's from there. And then Max Solomon, who we talked about, who we said, he's a good candidate, but just didn't get his campaign just didn't go anywhere. Only got 1% of the vote. Sorry, it's a Chicago Zoomer. I was hoping for him, but he wasn't polling very well, anyways. Let's go over to the Senate primaries. We had a couple elections there. Tammy Duckworth, the incumbent Democratic senator. You can see basically none of these counties have counted votes, and that's because she had no challenger. Like, there's literally zero reason to count these votes. It's all going to be 100% Tammy Duckworth. Now, eventually, they're going to have to, but they didn't count these votes because they didn't want to. Quite honestly, they knew every single vote was going to be for Tammy Duckworth, except maybe a couple of write-ins. But even then, like, let's see, 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. She was going to win anyway, so that's why they didn't count these votes. And she'll be taking on Kathy Salvi, who is from the Chicago area, and she defeated Peggy Hubbard. Now, Peggy Hubbard, I had been told by Chicago Zoomer and a couple other of my friends over in the great state of Illinois that Peggy Hubbard was the better candidate. And as you can see, she did very well in southern Illinois, but she got shelled out in the northern Illinois areas. Now, Kathy Salvi is a very establishment Republican, which is why she did so well up here. A lot of the GOP establishment consolidated their support around her, which is why she did well in the suburbs. And although she got shelled out across the rest of the state, her big victories in urban and suburban counties carried her over. And Peggy Hubbard outperformed expectations. People, it looked like she might have had a shot there, but in the end, she did not. So Kathy Salvi against Tammy Duckworth, that race could be interesting. Not saying it's going to flip, but I think that Kathy Salvi, the fact that she did do so well in Northern Illinois, and the fact that Darren Bailey is the Republican nominee and he did very well in the southern part, maybe there could be some crossover votes that could earn support for each other and possibly make the race interesting. It's too early. It's really just too early to tell though. But it's sad Peggy Hubbard lost, but Kathy Salvi is not the worst nominee either. Heading over the House elections. Really only one race I want to talk about, and that is the 15th district where MAGA Mary Miller won with 57% of the vote to Rodney Davis's 42%. Rodney Davis is an absolute rhino, as we talked about. He's a Ukraine shill. He voted for the COVID relief packages. He voted for January 6th. He voted for red flag laws. Very cringe. He lost to MAGA Mary Miller. He only got 42% of the vote, which that's good news, honestly. That's a big win, but we also expected that, so it's not as big as a win as we expected. But Mary Miller did outperform expectations a little bit, so I'm happy with that win there. Mary Miller is going to continue to be a great congresswoman. Let's head up to the Oklahoma Senate election. We had interesting results up there. No one cares about the Democratic primary. These people are all going to lose. James Langford, we talked about him a little bit in last night's video. He's cringe. He's a horrible Republican. He's a rhino. He's a neocon. He wants us to stay involved in wars in the Middle East, permanently. He's shielded for he wants us to stay in Iraq, Afghanistan. He supports the Patriot Act. He supported January 6th. He literally said the only reason he didn't vote to impeach Trump was because he was up for re-election. This guy is a rhino and just an establishment swamp creature by the definition. This guy's horrible on the issues. And for a state like Oklahoma, which voted for Trump by 35 points or so, one of the most Republican states out there, we should have a better candidate. And we had a good candidate named Jackson Lahmeyer. Jackson Lahmeyer got 26% of the vote, and he outperformed expectations. James Langford did pretty much about how we expected, about 65 to 70% of the vote. Although this race was not expected to go anywhere, the fact that Jackson Lahmeyer did get 26% of the vote without a Trump endorsement, really without any attention, shows that James Langford is vulnerable, and he's probably going to have to change his rhetoric a little bit for future elections. But yeah, Jackson Lahmeyer, thanks for putting up a hell of a fight. You didn't get any supporting from the GOP, any supporting from Trump, but you still got 26% of the vote against a senator that should against an incumbent senator. So good, kudos to you. Good job. So yeah, although we did not flip this race, Jackson Lahmeyer getting over 1/4 of the vote does say that there is a pretty anti-Langford movement out there. There's really no other races to talk about here. Let's go over the Colorado Senate race. Michael Bennet, incumbent Democrat, was unchallenged. He won all these counties. If we go down to Joe O'Dea on the Republican primary, though, Joe O'Dea he is the best candidate to win this race. He's not a rhino, but he's also not super conservative either. He's a good fit for Colorado. Ron Hanks is a good candidate, but he is one of those guys who's 2020 was stolen. Trump won Colorado, which he would not, is. I understand what he's saying, but it's not the best. It's not the best formula to win a state like Colorado. So Joe O'Dea was the best candidate in this nomination process, and it's a good thing he won. He has a good shot at victory. He's not a rhino. He just focuses on issues beside the 2020 election, which is good, and he is a relatively more moderate candidate. He's a good fit for Colorado, so he could make this race interesting. We'll have to see, I guess. But yeah, I'm happy he won there. Going up to the House elections, Lauren Boebert won pretty handily with 65% of the vote. I think me and other people on the right overreacted a little bit. No one really talked about her even having a chance of losing. Then there are a few people saying on Twitter and on right-wing media outlets "Oh, she's in trouble." And then people like me looked into it and were like, "Oh crap, she might actually be in trouble." But nah, she was fine. I think myself, a lot of people on the right, myself included, way overreacted to some of the polling and some of the data that came out of there. But yeah, she won handily. She's going to win re-election handily, and she's going to remain one of the best candidates and one of the best representatives in the country. Now, I will say, 65% for an incumbent is pretty bad. She did win. It wasn't super close, but 65% is a pretty poor performance for an incumbent. I'm not sure what happened in the 5th district here. 48. This guy did even worse though. So yeah, really not a whole lot to say there. It wasn't a close election, but in all reality, she should have won by more. So there was definitely something there, but it wasn't as big of an issue as we thought. So she pretty much won 2-1 anyway. So, but still, 65% for an incumbent is not the best performance. Heading over to the Colorado governor race, Heidi Ganahl, she won pretty narrowly, actually, pretty much with the same coalition as Joe O'Dea did, which tells me that she probably is a more moderate candidate, but she's also more electable. So we'll have to see what happens there. Jared Polis is not going to lose. This guy is beloved in Colorado, so although she may be a good candidate, I don't think she's going to win. Jared Polis is just beloved by Colorado. Heading over to the New York governor election, Kathy Hochul won with only 67% of the vote. Not a huge surprise there. The Republican race, actually, Lee Zeldin won very handily, 43% of the vote, absolutely dominated in upstate New York. You love to see it. Andrew Giuliani did best in the New York City area itself, especially Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx area, and then but then Lee Zeldin also did well in the Long Island area, which kind of outdid his gains in inner city, like urban New York. And then Rob Astoriano is a very moderate, like Ronald Reagan type, and he's actually the county commissioner of Westchester County, so he did very well here. It's kind of like the more wealthy suburbs north of New York City. He did very well up there. He won a couple counties, and then this guy, Harry Wilson, I have no idea who this guy is, but he won a couple counties in northern New York. Really not enough to affect the race. But yeah, Lee Zeldin won this race very handily over Andrew Giuliani. As I expected, he's going to be a great candidate. I think we have a serious shot at flipping New York. It's by no means going to be easy. I'm by no means saying it is going to flip. But Kathy Hochul, she's very unpopular. I mean, she only got 67% of the vote in her own primary. There's more than a couple 100,000 Democrats who are not happy with her. And Lee Zeldin has pretty much the entire base around him. Giuliani and Astriano are going to endorse him, and for an incumbent, 67% is pretty awful. So it's going to be an interesting race to watch. Zeldin's running a good campaign. I think we have a serious shot at flipping New York. Kathy Hochul's not well liked, and we have a good candidate. So we'll have to wait and see. I want to see more polling, but there have been polls already that show Zeldin within a couple points, possibly even winning in a couple of Republican pollsters. So you got to take those with a grain of salt. But still, I like to take like 3 to 5 percentage points if a poll is an internal. So if Zeldin's up by 1 or 2 in a Republican internal, that means it might only be down by like 3, 4, 5. So it is just interesting to watch, and as New York continues to descend into chaos, I'd say it's a hellhole compared to what it once was. It's interesting to see. So we may have a shot there. The Utah Senate race, Mormons. Mike Lee is one of the only solid Republicans out of Utah, and he gets 62% of the vote. The governor of Utah literally celebrates Pride Month. He has, he's so cringe. He celebrates Pride Month. He has pronouns in his bio, and he's the governor of Utah. And then we also have Mitt Romney as the other senator, so that tells you how much you need to know about Utah politics. Mike Lee's the one decent Utah representative, and he almost gets primaried by Becky Edwards, who primaried him from the left. They wanted a more moderate Republican senator. Mormons, you guys are killing me. You guys are killing me. Very cringe, very sad, but Mike Lee still hung on to one, so, got much to say there. Let's go over and check the Mississippi House runoff, which, this one hurt. This one really hurt. Michael Guest, the man who voted to send $40 billion to Ukraine. And then when Michael Cassidy came over and said, why don't we have health care and paid family leave for $30 billion, he gets called a socialist. Oh, this one hurt. So Michael Guest is an absolute rhino. He supported the January 6th commission, I believe. He supported supports sending billions and billions to Ukraine. And then Michael Cassidy came along. He's the America First guy we talked about. He came along and said, why don't we spend $30 billion on policies that would help Americans here, like paid family leave, family tax credit. If you get married and you have a kid and you raise him well, you get $20,000 from the government. It seems fair to me. Pro-family policies, America First policies, putting families first. Michael Cassidy suggests that, and Michael Guest calls him a socialist. So apparently, it is socialist to spend $30 billion on American families and American workers, and it is completely fine and fiscally reasonable to send $40 billion to a country that you can't even find on a map. Oh my god, this hurts so bad. And Michael Cassidy had a serious shot, and then Kevin McCarthy and the GOP establishment spent $500,000 to paint Cassidy as a socialist because he wants to spend money on a health care program. It is apparently socialist to spend $35 billion on a health care program to help people with diabetes and people with health issues, but it is not socialist to send $40 billion to Ukraine. Can you explain this to me? This is the state of the Republican Party. They will gladly send $40 billion to a country in Ukraine that you can't even find on a map. But actual American people like us, the actual everyday person, it is socialist to help them out a little bit with tax cuts, with tax credits, and with benefits. This hurts my brain. Michael Cassidy, you got screwed over. Michael Cassidy should run for governor in 2023, primary out the rhino who got rid of the Confederate flag in Mississippi and the Confederate monuments, and you need to become the Huey Long of Mississippi. I am calling it right now. Michael Cassidy will be the Huey Long of Mississippi. For those of you who don't know, Huey Long was the governor of Louisiana back in the 1920s. He was a Democrat, but that was when the Democrats were kind of based. He was like super socially conservative, but super economically populist. Like people called this guy a socialist. They said he's a far left socialist. But this guy literally came in there and fixed like Louisiana's economy, and he made he fixed the roads. This guy was based. Huey Long was epic. He tried to run for president against FDR, but he was assassinated. There's people saying that maybe he died because FDR was scared he would lose. You know, we don't know for sure, but he was basically the dictator of Louisiana, and he was this far right on socialist. He was very liberal and socialism on economics. So Cassidy, you have to run and be the Huey Long of Mississippi. Please do. You deserve better. Michael Cassidy is a guy who actually cares about the people in his district. He says Mississippi has a lot of healthcare problems. We have a lot of we're a struggling state. Let's spend money and help fix our economy. Let's help focus on our health issues. And then he gets branded a socialist by Michael Guest and Kevin McCarthy, who live in their mansions in Washington D.C. Very cringe. It sucks. This one really hurt. And yeah, Michael Guest, Michael Cassidy, you got screwed over. Michael Guest, we're coming for you. I didn't even know who you were until a few weeks ago, but I now despise you. I'm sorry. And then we had Mike Easel, who also ran and who also made it to a runoff against another incumbent Republican. This race, yes, the incumbent lost, but really it's not that huge of a gain. Like Mike Easel was a good Republican, but he's nothing great. He's MAGA Inc. He's a good Republican, but he's not a great one. Palazzo is not perfect. I mean, this race was kind of thought it would be neck and neck. Yeah, nothing really too crazy happened there. But yeah, Michael Cassidy, you got screwed over. I'm so sorry. Let's head over to the Nebraska House special election. This race was actually interesting. So those of you who did not know, Nebraska's first district is a relatively Republican-leaning one. It's a very suburban district. It voted for Donald Trump by like 10 to 11 points, I believe. And the incumbent representative, Jeff Fortenberry, was actually arrested and kicked out of the House for bribery and corruption charges. And so there was a special election to fill that seat. And this was interesting. Flood, the the Republican nominee, took on Pansing Brooks, the Democratic nominee. And this is a district that voted for Donald Trump by 11 percentage points. It voted for this guy by like 7. And people are going to say, oh, it's Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade hurt the Republicans. Roe v. Wade is overturned. The suburbs are turning out heavily for the Democrats. The blue wave 2022. Democrats going to hold the House and the Senate. And it's like, no. The mail-in ballots for this election were all cast. The majority of Democrats vote by mail, if you did not know. Not all Democrats, but the majority of the Democrats like to vote by mail. They like to use the mail-in voting systems that are certainly legal and don't lead to fraud at all. 2020 election was free and fair. But so most Democrats like to vote that way. Roe v. Wade was after the cutoff for the mail-in ballots. The majority of these Democratic votes were cast before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Republicans like to turn out on election day. And they still did win. It was still a 6-7 point victory. Now, it wasn't the victory it should have been. People thought it would be more like an R plus 10, R plus 15 victory because of the national environment. But you have to remember that this race was an incumbent Republican who was arrested for corrupt scandal charges. I think if anything, this is less of a reflection on Roe v. Wade and the blue wave, and this is more just that people were upset that a Republican was involved in scandalous charges. People were turned off with the Republicans. And Patty Pansing Brooks, if you look at her campaign, she's a former Republican running this like moderate centrist type. In the suburbs of Omaha, her only losing by 7 points or so, it really is not that surprising in my opinion. I mean, I would have expected Republicans to win by more, but it's not a cause for concern. And you're gonna see all the Democrats saying it's Roe v. Wade is overturned. This district voted for Trump by 11 points and only voted for the Republicans by 7. Blue wave imminent. And it's like, no, most Democrats voted, but most people voted before Roe v. Wade was even overturned. And the incumbent Republican, not Mike Flood, the other Republican who previously represented this election, was involved in scandalous charges that everyone knew about. Of course, Republicans aren't going to be as energized, and of course, more moderates are going to vote Democrat. And Patty Pansing Brooks was a very moderate Democrat. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I would have expected Mike Flood to win by more, but it does kind of make sense that it would be a little closer than people expected. So, really not much to say about that. That's the coverage of last night's primary elections. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, a mixed bag of races. Overall, we got a couple solid victories, but the big one that we were all hoping to pull off went horribly wrong for us in Mississippi. So, yeah, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe for more.